Studio 50, New York City, February 9th, 1964. The Beatles are performing for 73 million viewers, the largest audience in television history. But halfway through their second song, Paul McCartney's eyes lock onto one face in the crowd. A 16-year-old girl crying, not from excitement, from something else entirely. When the commercial break hits, Paul walks straight to Ed Sullivan with an impossible request. Ed has a choice: protect the show or protect one sick teenager he's never met. What happened when the cameras came back on wasn't in any script. It was the night live television learned that stopping the performance can be more powerful than finishing it. The cold hit you first. February in New York City carried that particular bite that cuts through wool coats and settles in your bones. But on February 9th, 1964, nobody waiting outside CBS Studio 50 felt the cold. They had been standing there since dawn, some since the night before, pressed against police barricades, clutching tickets that promised something unprecedented. Inside, the warmth of studio lights created a different world entirely. Studio 50 seated 728 people. That night, nearly 1,000 somehow squeezed inside. Fire marshals looked the other way. This was history in the making, and everyone knew it. Ed Sullivan stood in his usual position, center stage, reviewing note cards with the same methodical precision he had brought to every Sunday night broadcast for 16 years. At 62 years old, he had introduced America to Elvis Presley, Maria Callas, and countless others. His posture never changed. Shoulders square, expression neutral, voice carrying that distinctive New York cadence that made presidents and comedians sound equally important. Tonight's broadcast had been prepared with military efficiency. 8 cameras positioned at calculated angles. Security protocols unprecedented for a variety show. CBS executives had negotiated every detail with Brian Epstein, the Beatles' manager, down to the exact camera shots allowed during each song. This was controlled chaos, and control was Ed Sullivan's specialty. The rehearsals that afternoon had revealed what America would witness that evening: pure pandemonium. Teenage girls screamed at volumes that overwhelmed the studio's sound equipment. Engineers adjusted microphone levels 3 times. Director John Moffat coordinated his camera operators to capture specific faces in the audience. The crying, the fainting, the ecstatic hysteria that newspapers were calling Beatlemania. Everything was choreographed. The screams were expected. The tears were anticipated. Even the apparent chaos had been carefully planned to look spontaneous while remaining completely under control. At 8 o'clock Eastern Time, Ed Sullivan delivered his famous introduction with characteristic understatement. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles." The screams began before the 4 young men from Liverpool even reached their instruments. Paul McCartney, 21 years old, stepped to the microphone. John Lennon, 23, positioned himself at the second microphone. George Harrison, 20, and Ringo Starr, 23, completed the formation that 73 million Americans were watching simultaneously, nearly 40% of the entire United States population. "All My Loving" opened with the precision of a well-rehearsed performance. The screams were deafening, exactly as predicted. The cameras captured close-ups of teenage girls clutching each other, mouths open in ecstatic agony. America was watching exactly what CBS had promised: the British invasion, delivered with perfect timing and professional execution. But something was about to interrupt the script that no one had planned for. During the second song, "Till There Was You," Paul McCartney's voice carried that smooth charm that had already conquered England. The melody was gentler than the opening number, chosen specifically to show American parents that these 4 young men weren't just noise and hysteria. This was McCartney demonstrating musicianship, proving the Beatles could deliver tenderness alongside energy. But halfway through the second verse, something shifted in Paul's expression. His eyes, which had been scanning the audience with professional awareness, stopped moving. They fixed on a specific point in the 4th row. The cameras didn't catch it. They were focused on close-ups of his face, On the screaming girls in the front rows? On the carefully choreographed shots that director John Moffat had planned during rehearsal? The audience at home saw only what CBS wanted them to see: controlled pandemonium, Beatlemania packaged for family viewing. But Paul saw something different. In the fourth row, among the hundreds of crying, screaming teenagers, one girl stood out. She was crying, yes, but not like the others. Her face wasn't flushed with excitement. It was pale, almost gray. She wasn't screaming. She was clutching her chest, and her friend beside her looked frightened rather than ecstatic. Paul kept singing. Professional training carried him through the rest of the song, but his eyes kept returning to that fourth row, to that one face that didn't match the orchestrated chaos around her. When "Till There Was You" ended, the screams reached a new crescendo. Ed Sullivan stepped forward with his note cards, ready to introduce the next act according to the precise schedule. The show would continue to commercial break, then return for the Beatles' second segment. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. But during the planned commercial break, something happened that CBS never anticipated and Brian Epstein had never negotiated. Paul McCartney didn't return to the designated holding area backstage where the Beatles were supposed to wait between segments. Instead, he walked directly toward Ed Sullivan, with George Harrison beside him. Stage managers tried to redirect them. They had 90 seconds until cameras went live again. The Beatles needed to be in position. Paul ignored them. He approached Ed Sullivan with an urgency that cut through the backstage chaos. "Mr. Sullivan," Paul said, his Liverpool accent thick and earnest, "there's a girl in the audience who needs help." Ed Sullivan looked at the young performer standing before him. The legendary composure held. This was live television. Interruptions were managed, not accommodated. Unexpected requests were politely deflected until after the broadcast. "We're back on air in 90 seconds, boys," Ed said, his tone professional but not unkind. But Paul McCartney didn't move, and what he said next would force Ed Sullivan to make a choice that would define his entire career. "She's not crying like the others," Paul insisted, speaking quickly as the seconds ticked away. "Something's wrong. I watched her during the last song. She's pale. She's holding her chest. Her friend looks terrified." George Harrison nodded in agreement. "It's not fan excitement, Mr. Sullivan. Something's genuinely wrong with her." Ed Sullivan had navigated live television for 3 decades. He had maintained composure when technical failures threatened broadcasts, when performers missed cues, when the unexpected tried to derail carefully constructed shows. His response to chaos was always the same: acknowledge it minimally, manage it professionally, keep the show moving forward. He glanced toward the control room where director John Moffat was counting down the seconds. 60 seconds to air. The Beatles needed to be in position for their second segment. Commercial sponsors had paid unprecedented rates for this broadcast. CBS executives were watching from offices in Manhattan. 73 million viewers were waiting. The format was sacred. The schedule was absolute. Nothing in the contract between CBS and Brian Epstein mentioned stopping the show, breaking the performance structure, or acknowledging individual audience members during the broadcast. But something in Paul McCartney's face stopped Ed's automatic professional response. This wasn't a publicity stunt. The young Beatle wasn't asking for special treatment or extra camera time. He was asking for permission to help someone. "Show me," Ed said quietly. They moved quickly to the edge of the stage. Paul pointed toward the fourth row. Ed's eyes, trained by years of reading audiences, found her immediately. A teenage girl, perhaps 16, with dark hair and a face that confirmed everything Paul had described. She was crying, but the tears looked different from the ecstatic hysteria surrounding her. Her friend had an arm around her shoulders, protective rather than celebratory. The floor manager appeared at Ed's elbow. 30 seconds, Mr. Sullivan." Ed Sullivan stood at the edge of that stage, looking at one sick teenager in a sea of screaming fans, and faced a choice that every calculation of professional television production told him to refuse. Keep the show moving. Address it after the broadcast. Don't disrupt the carefully planned format that had made his program the most successful variety show in American history. But Ed Sullivan had spent 30 years introducing performers to America. He had watched countless young artists step onto his stage, some terrified, some arrogant, all seeking something from the spotlight. He had never seen what he saw now in Paul McCartney's eyes, genuine concern that had nothing to do with career or image. 20 seconds, Mr. Sullivan, the floor manager said, more urgently now. Ed looked at Paul, then at the girl in the fourth row, then made a decision that would become more famous than any song performed that night. "When we come back," he told Paul, quietly, "do what needs to be done." The cameras came back live. Ed Sullivan stood center stage, but something in his bearing had changed in ways the television audience couldn't immediately identify. He looked at the Beatles, then toward the fourth row, then did something he had never done in 16 years of hosting. He completely abandoned his script. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying that familiar cadence but softened with something unprecedented. "We're going to do something we've never done before on this program." In the control room, Director John Moffat's hand froze over the shot sheet. No one had informed him of any script changes. His camera operators waited for direction that wasn't coming. "The Beatles have asked to speak directly to someone in our audience," Ed continued. The screaming stopped. 73 million people leaned closer to their television sets across America. In living rooms from New York to California, families who had been watching controlled chaos suddenly witnessed something entirely different. Unscripted television, live and unpredictable. Paul McCartney stepped forward to the microphone. "We saw you crying," he said, speaking directly to the fourth row, his voice gentle but clear. "And we wanted to make sure you're all right." The CBS cameras, trained all evening to capture mass hysteria, now focused on one face. Margaret Denton, 16 years old from Queens, New York, tears streaming down her cheeks, managed to speak into the sudden silence. "I'm okay. I can't believe this is real." But George Harrison wasn't satisfied with polite reassurance. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "Is it just excitement, love, or is something else wrong?" Margaret's friend, Linda Torres, spoke up from beside her. Her voice carried the protective urgency of someone genuinely frightened. "She has a heart condition. She wasn't supposed to come tonight. Her parents said no, but she loves you so much she snuck out." The weight of those words settled over Studio 50 like snow. The screaming teenagers who had been fainting with excitement moments before sat in stunned silence. This wasn't fan hysteria. This was a sick girl who had risked her health to see 4 boys from Liverpool, and those 4 boys had stopped the biggest television broadcast in history to make sure she was safe. John Lennon, known for sharp wit and emotional detachment, moved to join Paul and George at the stage's edge. Then Ringo Starr left his drums and walked forward. 4 young men, barely out of their teens themselves, stood together looking at one sick teenager, and everything about the performance dissolved into something else entirely. Ed Sullivan watched from the side of the stage as the Beatles transformed before America's eyes from foreign curiosities into something far more powerful. Human beings choosing compassion over performance, people over profit, love over the carefully managed image that fame demands. What happened next had never occurred in the history of live variety television. Paul McCartney walked off the stage. Not to the wings, not backstage, but directly into the audience, toward the fourth row where Margaret Denton sat crying. The CBS cameras followed, breaking every rule of variety show blocking. Director John Moffat, surrendering entirely to the moment, signaled his operators. "Stay with them. Forget the shot sheet. Follow the story." 73 million viewers watched as Paul knelt beside Margaret's seat. The studio microphones, designed to capture stage performances, somehow picked up his quiet words. "You shouldn't have risked yourself for us." Margaret, overwhelmed by the impossibility of the moment, whispered back, "You don't understand. Your music is the only thing that makes me forget I'm sick." John Lennon joined Paul in the audience aisle. Then George, then Ringo, leaving the stage completely empty except for Ed Sullivan, standing alone in the spotlight, watching four famous young men surround one sick teenager with a tenderness that millions were witnessing in real time. "What's your favorite song?" George asked gently. "All My Loving," Margaret managed to say through her tears. And there, in the fourth row of CBS Studio 50, with no instruments, no stage, no performance infrastructure, the Beatles began singing All My Loving, a cappella. Four voices harmonizing without amplification, without spectacle, without anything except the simple gift of music offered to one girl who needed it. The camera cut to Ed Sullivan, standing on the empty stage. For 30 years, he had maintained composure through every conceivable situation. He had hosted broadcasts during national tragedies, introduced performers through technical disasters, kept his legendary stone face through comedy routines designed to make him crack. But in this moment, watching four young men choose humanity over the biggest broadcast in television history, Ed Sullivan's famous composure completely shattered. Tears streamed down his face. His hand covered his mouth. The man who had introduced Elvis Presley to America, who had hosted presidents and opera singers with equal professional detachment, broke entirely. The studio audience rose as one, not screaming now, but standing in reverent silence, then applauding with a solemnity usually reserved for sacred moments. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something else entirely. Grace, witnessed by millions, transforming live television into a medium for genuine human connection. When the a cappella performance ended, Ed Sullivan walked to the microphone. His voice cracked when he spoke, tears still visible on his face. Vulnerability broadcast to 73 million homes. In 30 years of broadcasting, I have never been more proud to present performers on this stage. The Beatles returned to the stage, but television had changed forever, and everyone watching knew they had witnessed something that mattered far more than any song.